Hello and welcome. Today we delve into the brutal and unpredictable battles of the Pacific Theater between 1942 and 1945. A landscape defined by dense jungles, relentless close-quarters combat, and groundbreaking weaponry that changed the course of the war. Have you ever wondered how Marines managed to turn the tide in such tangled, lethal terrain? Could a firearm not traditionally used in warfare, like a shotgun, have given them an unexpected edge? How did the Japanese military, confident in their doctrines and superior numbers, find themselves vulnerable to a weapon they never anticipated? Did the introduction of the 12-gauge pump-action shotgun truly disrupt decades of Japanese combat strategy? And what secrets do the Winchester models, 1897 and 1912, hold about the untold stories of these jungle battles? All these pieces form a larger puzzle. How did a seemingly simple weapon challenge the very foundations of Japanese tactical doctrine and influence the outcome of key Pacific campaigns? In this video, we'll uncover the truth behind the shotguns that shocked an enemy, separating fact from myth and revealing a shocking shift in jungle warfare. Get ready. The most astonishing revelations about weapon innovation and combat strategy start right now. The Pacific Theater between the years of 1942 and 1945 was characterized by some of the most challenging and distinctive combat environments encountered during the Second World War. One of the defining features of this theater was the dense, tangled jungle undergrowth that blanketed countless Pacific islands. This thick foliage and rugged terrain created a uniquely close-quarters battlefield, where combat often unfolded at astonishingly short distances, sometimes less than 30 yards apart, making traditional range weaponry less effective and emphasizing the importance of close combat tactics. In this tumultuous setting, the United States Marine Corps introduced a weapon that fundamentally challenged the prevailing assumptions held by Japanese forces regarding modern warfare. This weapon was the 12-gauge pump-action shotgun, a firearm that, at the time, was not traditionally associated with military use, but was nonetheless ideally suited to the conditions of jungle combat. Its deployment in the Pacific campaigns marked a significant departure from standard infantry weaponry and demonstrated a strategic adaptation to the realities of jungle warfare. Although detailed records of the specific combat use of these shotguns remain somewhat scarce, it is well documented that both Winchester Model 1897 and Model 1912 shotguns found their way into Marine units operating across the Pacific. Their presence provided an unexpected and formidable tactical advantage, one that Japanese military doctrine, which was heavily based on conventional warfare principles, had not anticipated or prepared for. These shotguns offered Marines a means to deliver devastating firepower at extremely close ranges, effectively disrupting Japanese tactics that relied heavily on infiltration, night assaults, and hand-to-hand combat. The Imperial Japanese Army, for many decades prior to the outbreak of the Pacific War, had meticulously prepared for conflict with Western nations. Their military manuals primarily focused on engagements involving British rifles, American machine guns, French mortars, and Soviet submachine guns, standard weaponry of the time. However, shotguns, which the Japanese military considered primarily tools used in hunting birds or small game rather than weapons suitable for combat, were conspicuously absent from their tactical doctrines. This oversight would prove to be a critical vulnerability as the war progressed, especially in the dense jungles where close-quarters combat was the norm. During the early years of the conflict, the Japanese military relied heavily on their doctrine of spiritual resilience and the belief that the strength of the human spirit could compensate for material shortages. Their strategy was built around a concept that emphasized the spiritual superiority of Japanese soldiers, an ideology that they believed would allow them to overcome disadvantages in equipment and industrial capacity. Japan's industrial output, particularly in the production of steel and modern weaponry, was vastly inferior to that of the United States. In a single month, American industries could produce more steel than Japan produced in an entire year. Faced with such material limitations, the Japanese military devised a doctrine focused on making each soldier a superior close combatant, relying heavily on rigorous training, discipline, and the indomitable spirit of the Japanese warrior. The core tactical approach was a series of night infiltration attacks, followed by brutal close-quarters combat using rifles and bayonets. This doctrine had seen considerable success against Chinese forces and was also employed effectively by British troops in Malaya and American defenders in the Philippines. The standard operation involves stealthily approaching the enemy under cover of darkness, penetrating their lines through infiltration, and then engaging in fierce hand-to-hand combat where Japanese soldiers believed they held a decisive advantage. However, the introduction of shotguns, particularly the Winchester models, significantly undermined this entire tactical framework. At extremely close ranges, precisely where Japanese doctrine envisaged their dominance, a Marine armed with a Winchester Model 1897 could unleash a devastating volume of fire. Thanks to the weapon's slamfire capability, a Marine could discharge 6 loads of triple-aught buckshot in roughly 2 seconds, each shell loaded with 9.33 caliber pellets. This rapid, sustained burst created a widespread pattern, making it nearly impossible for Japanese soldiers to avoid being hit amid dense jungle vegetation and limited visibility. The Winchester Model 1897, a firearm initially designed by the legendary inventor John Browning and refined over nearly half a century of production, became the primary shotgun used by the Marine Corps during the early stages of the Pacific campaigns. The military version of this shotgun featured a 20-inch barrel, a perforated heat shield to prevent overheating during sustained fire, and a bayonet lug compatible with the M1917 sword bayonet. Most importantly, the Model 97 was designed without a trigger disconnector, allowing for continuous fire, an advantage that was exploited by Marines who could hold down the trigger and operate the pump to deliver a relentless spray of buckshot. The Model 1912, another Winchester firearm tailored for military use, was developed by engineer T.C. John and shared many of the operational features of the earlier model. It was designed to be a reliable, easy-to-operate shotgun capable of withstanding the rigors of combat in the challenging jungle environments of the Pacific. Both weapons, through their robust design and devastating firepower at close range, played an instrumental role in shifting the tide of small unit engagements. During the early stages of military firearm development, the son of a renowned designer notably enhanced the original Browning model by integrating an internal hammer mechanism. This innovative modification played a crucial role in preventing accidental discharges, thereby increasing the safety and reliability of the weapon during intense combat situations. By the year 1943, this improved version, known as the Model 12, had largely taken over the role previously held by the Model 97 within Marine units. Despite this shift, both models continued to serve throughout the duration of the Second World War, reflecting their continued relevance and utility in various combat scenarios. Military procurement records from that era indicate a consistent pattern of production for these shotguns. However, specific details regarding the number of units actually deployed in combat zones remain undocumented in the official records. The ammunition used by these weapons proved to be as vital to their effectiveness as the guns themselves. Standard 12-gauge buckshot loads classified as number 00 contained 9 individual pellets. Each pellet weighed approximately 53.8 grains and measured about 8.38 millimeters in diameter. When fired at a target from a distance of 10 yards, the shotgun's pattern would spread to roughly 10 inches across. At 20 yards, this pattern would expand to approximately 20 inches, and at 30 yards, it would reach about 30 inches, with the pattern spread proportionally increasing with distance. In jungle combat environments, where visibility was often limited to no more than 30 yards due to dense foliage, this pattern spread became a significant tactical advantage. The wide dispersal of pellets helped compensate for the difficulty of precise aiming amidst thick vegetation, where exact shot placement was nearly impossible. The campaign at Guadalcanal, which took place from August 1942 to February 1943, marked the first major American offensive in the Pacific theater. During this campaign, Marines of the 1st Division arrived equipped with a variety of weapons, including shotguns. However, their exact numbers and the specific roles these shotguns played remain undocumented in the official battle reports. One of the most notable engagements during this campaign was the battle at the Tenarue River, more accurately called Alligator Creek, on August 21, 1942. In this confrontation, Colonel Kona Ichiki's detachment of 917 men was almost completely annihilated, with Japanese casualties totaling about 789 killed. While this battle is frequently highlighted in accounts of the Pacific War, primary sources indicate that the Japanese losses were primarily due to the devastating firepower of Browning M1917 water-cooled machine guns and 37mm anti-tank guns firing canister rounds. These weapons contributed significantly to the Japanese defeat, with only passing mentions of shotgun use in the official reports. Throughout the Guadalcanal campaign, Marines utilized shotguns mainly for perimeter defense and jungle patrols. Photographic evidence shows point men armed with Winchester shotguns during patrols, positioned strategically to respond swiftly to ambushes in the dense jungle terrain. Nevertheless, after-action reports tend to focus overwhelmingly on the impact of machine guns, rifles, and artillery, regarding shotguns as secondary weapons whose contribution to overall battle outcomes was relatively minor. The jungle environment itself posed unique challenges for all weapon systems. However, shotguns face particular issues. The standard paper-hulled shotgun shells absorb moisture in the humid conditions, swelling to the point where they could no longer be chambered properly. This problem persisted throughout the Pacific campaign until the military officially adopted brass-case shells, which proved more resistant to the tropical climate. The pervasive humidity of the Pacific Islands created a critical ammunition problem that almost negated the effectiveness of shotguns. Commercially available shotgun shells, typically made with paper hulls, readily absorbed moisture in the jungle's constant high humidity. This absorption caused the shells to swell, leading to difficulties in chambering. Shells that functioned smoothly in dry conditions would become swollen and unusable after exposure to tropical moisture, with reports from Marines describing shells swelling so severely that they had to be hammered into the chambers, an impossible task during combat situations. This crisis persisted until March 29, 1945, when the military officially adopted the all-brass 19 shell, designated as the 12-gauge, number 00 buckshot, and known as the M19 brass shell. This new type of shell, made entirely of brass, significantly improved reliability by resisting moisture absorption, thereby restoring the shotgun's operational effectiveness, especially during the final stages of the war. For shotguns to serve as effective close-quarters weapons, especially in confined spaces such as caves, bunkers, and thick foliage. Despite these tactical considerations, the deployment of shotguns in the Pacific theater remained limited. The late adoption of this weapon type, combined with the logistical and supply challenges faced during the campaign, explains why many veterans from the Pacific War seldom mention shotguns in their memoirs or personal recollections. During the bulk of the conflict, shortages of ammunition and the strain on resupply chains severely hampered the practical use of shotguns, rendering them less effective and less prominent in combat scenarios. The formalization of shotgun training within the United States military framework was codified through the publication of Technical Manual TM 9285, which saw its initial release on the 21st of September in the year 1942. This manual provided comprehensive instructions and specifications for the operation and tactical employment of several shotgun models, including the Winchester Models 97 and 12, the Remington Model 11, Stevens Models 520, as well as the Stevens 620 and the Ithaca Model 37. Marine Corps training for these weapons was conducted at multiple key bases, including Camp Pendleton in California, Camp Loon in North Carolina, and Parris Island in South Carolina. The training curriculum emphasized their application in specific combat scenarios, such as maintaining point security during patrols, executing swift engagements during nighttime defenses, clearing caves and bunkers, and guarding prisoners. Marines learned the distinctive slamfire technique of the Winchester Model 97, a rapid-fire method that allowed for successive discharges with a single trigger pull. However, instructors consistently cautioned against over-reliance on this feature because of its propensity to consume ammunition rapidly and cause barrel overheating, which could compromise the weapon's integrity and the soldier's safety. According to the Marine Corps' official organization table, effective from the year 1943, each Marine division was authorized a total of 306 shotguns. These weapons were mainly allocated to specialized units such as military police companies, pioneer battalions tasked with engineering and demolition duties, and selective rifle squads assigned to unique operational roles. This distribution strategy meant that, although shotguns were present across all major Marine operations, they constituted less than 2% of the overall small arms within a division's arsenal. Historically, this sparse deployment is reflected in the limited mention of shotguns within combat records and personal accounts. Despite their presence, shotguns did not play a dominant role in the broader tactical landscape of the war. Contrasting sharply with the American experience, Japan never issued formal diplomatic protest regarding the use of shotguns by American forces. This absence of official concern stands in stark contrast to Germany's protest in September of the year 1918, which accused American soldiers of violating the Hague Convention by employing shotguns. German authorities argued that shotguns caused unnecessary suffering among prisoners and threatened to execute captured Americans using the weapons. Conversely, Japanese military documents captured during and after the conflict make no specific mention of shotguns or any need for specialized countermeasures against them. Japanese training materials from the era primarily concentrated on countering American firepower in a broad sense, emphasizing the threat posed by machine guns, artillery, and flamethrowers. They did not single out shotguns as weapons that necessitated particular tactical responses or defensive measures. This lack of focus indicates that, although individual Japanese soldiers undoubtedly encountered American shotgun fire in the course of combat, the weapons themselves did not demonstrate enough tactical significance to compel the Japanese military to develop specific counter-strategies. Post-war interrogations of Japanese officers reinforce this interpretation, as they contain no references to shotguns as weapons of particular concern. Instead, officials discussed the overwhelming American material superiority, including advanced artillery, machine guns, and coordinated combined arms tactics that rendered shotguns relatively insignificant in the grand tactical picture. The silence regarding shotguns in these military assessments starkly contrasts with the extensive Japanese documentation about countering American flamethrowers, which indeed prompted the Japanese to develop specific tactical adaptations and countermeasures. The New Guinea campaign, spanning from 1942 to 1945, exemplifies some of the most arduous terrain and combat conditions faced by both Army and Marine units during the Pacific War. In this environment, dense jungle with limited visibility, often only a few yards, created a scenario where shotguns could theoretically have been particularly useful weapons in close-quarters encounters, such as in caves, dense foliage, or confined bunkers. Recognizing this, units like the 32nd and 41st Infantry Divisions requested shotguns based on the successful experiences of Marine units at the Guadalcanal campaign. Given the challenging terrain, where the thick canopy and undergrowth severely limited sight lines, shotguns appeared well suited for close-range defense and clearing operations. Despite these tactical considerations and initial requests, the actual deployment of shotguns in the New Guinea campaign remained limited. Factors such as logistical difficulties, the late adoption of the weapon type, and the overarching focus on more conventional firearms prevented widespread use. During the early stages of their deployment, Marines faced significant challenges in effectively employing shotguns in combat situations. Conditions for their use were heavily influenced by strict operational criteria, which often limited their practicality. Yet the same issues with ammunition reliability that had hampered Marine efforts during the Guadalcanal campaign became even more pronounced in the rugged highlands of New Guinea. The relentless combination of persistent rainfall, the necessity of river crossings, and the extreme humidity created a hostile environment that severely compromised the performance of paper shell ammunition. Under these harsh conditions, the shells frequently failed to function properly, rendering the shotguns unreliable as combat weapons. Consequently, units that had initially requested shotguns often chose to leave them behind in rear areas, opting instead for more dependable firearms like the M1 Garand rifle, the Thompson submachine gun, and the Browning automatic rifle. The experience in New Guinea starkly illustrated an essential lesson, that a weapon's effectiveness on paper or in controlled training environments did not necessarily translate into battlefield success, especially in unforgiving jungle terrains. While shotguns demonstrated impressive capabilities during training exercises and under ideal conditions, the brutal reality of jungle warfare exposed critical limitations that could not be addressed until the arrival of better quality ammunition in 1945. Despite these setbacks, Marine units during the Pacific conflict developed specialized tactical doctrines to maximize the potential of shotguns in specific roles. These weapons proved most effective when employed in three primary functions: providing point security during patrols, defending perimeters against infiltration, and guarding prisoners. In patrol operations, designated scout teams often carried shotguns as their leading elements, utilizing the weapon's formidable stopping power to prepare for potential ambushes. The wide spread of buckshot was particularly effective in suppressing multiple enemy positions simultaneously, enabling the patrol to advance with greater confidence while the pointmen maintained suppressive fire. This tactic, however, demanded rigorous training and a high degree of trust among team members, as the shotgun operator would often work well ahead of supporting units, relying on their ability to respond swiftly in case of contact. Perimeter defense during nighttime or low visibility conditions represented another tactical application of shotguns. Marines stationed at likely infiltration points used shotgun-equipped sentries to provide early warning and physical deterrence. The distinctive sound of a pump-action shotgun being cycled served a dual purpose. It acted as a psychological deterrent to potential infiltrators and warned friendly forces of imminent threat. Nevertheless, the limited ammunition capacity of shotguns meant that once engaged, shotgun operators required immediate support from rifles or machine guns to sustain their defensive efforts. The return of Marine forces to the Philippines in October of 1944 saw a strategic emphasis on utilizing shotguns for urban combat scenarios, particularly in the intense battles within Manila. The Sixth Army, which was responsible for much of the fighting in the city, requested substantial quantities of shotguns to support house-to-house clearing operations. However, Marine participation in the ground campaign was relatively limited, mainly focusing on artillery support and air operations. The Army's 73rd Infantry Division, which bore the brunt of urban combat, did employ shotguns during house clearing, yet after-action reports often emphasized the primary roles of flamethrowers and demolition charges in neutralizing Japanese strongpoints. The urban fighting in Manila provided a mixed picture of shotgun utility. On the one hand, shotguns delivered devastating close-range firepower during room-clearing missions, enabling Marines to quickly neutralize defenders in confined spaces. On the other hand, Japanese forces rapidly adapted by barricading themselves within fortified positions, which minimized the effectiveness of shotguns' spread pattern at close range. As a result, the weapons proved most advantageous in surprise encounters rather than during deliberate assaults where defenders had time to prepare defenses. By the time of the February 1945 invasion of Eniwetok, it was reported that 3 Marine divisions were authorized to carry a total of approximately 918 shotguns. However, the volcanic ash and extensive tunneling on the island created an environment that further complicated shotgun employment, highlighting both the potential and limitations of the weapon in diverse combat settings. Overall, while shotguns offered unique advantages in specific tactical situations, their effectiveness was often constrained by environmental conditions, logistical challenges, and the tactics used by determined defenders. During the intense battles across the Pacific theater, the battlefield conditions and tactical approaches largely diminished the role traditionally played by shotguns. The rugged terrain, fortified positions, and the evolving nature of combat created environments where shotguns contributed minimally to the overall fighting. A prominent example of this shift occurred after the iconic flag raising on Mount Suribachi during the Battle of Iwo Jima, an event that symbolized Marine triumph. Surprisingly, that moment came after the suppression of Japanese defenses through the concerted efforts of flamethrower teams and demolition units, rather than through direct shotgun assaults. Marine units fighting on Iwo Jima primarily relied on flamethrowers to clear the numerous caves and tunnels where Japanese defenders had entrenched themselves. These flamethrower teams utilized specialized equipment, such as flame tanks, which could project burning fuel up to 40 yards into complex cave systems, a range far surpassing the typical reach of shotguns. Throughout the campaign on Iwo Jima, The records show that the number of American casualties, numbering approximately 26,000, cannot be directly linked to the absence or failure of shotgun tactics. The notion that shotguns could have made a decisive difference remains unsupported, as the timing of the adoption of more reliable ammunition played a significant role. The introduction of brass cartridge shells, which offered more dependable performance, arrived too late to influence the fighting on Iwo Jima significantly. These brass shells, designated as the M19, only reached some units in late March of the year 1945, well after the fiercest fighting had concluded. This delay meant that the Marines still grappled with issues stemming from the earlier paper-based shells, which often failed during critical moments, further limiting the effective use of shotguns during this particularly brutal phase of the Pacific Campaign. As the war progressed into the spring and early summer of the year 1945, the Battle of Okinawa exemplified the culmination of lessons learned throughout the Pacific Theater. The 1st and 6th Marine Divisions, which were among the most heavily involved, were theoretically equipped with a total of 612 shotguns, now supplied with the more reliable brass ammunition. Nevertheless, the nature of the Okinawan battlefield, characterized mainly by open terrain and well-prepared defensive positions, limited opportunities for shotgun employment. On Okinawa, the Japanese 22nd Army adopted a defense-in-depth strategy, avoiding the large-scale banzai charges that had previously characterized Japanese tactics. Instead, the Japanese defenders occupied heavily fortified positions along the Shuri line, fighting from bunkers and extensive cave networks, which kept American infantry at extended ranges and reduced the effectiveness of close-quarters weapons like shotguns. In these conditions, Marine tactics relied heavily on coordinated efforts between tanks and infantry, with flamethrower tanks providing close support to assault-fortified positions. The shotguns at Okinawa found limited use, mostly during the final stages of the campaign, when Marine squads worked to clear the remaining Japanese defenders from captured fortifications. Additionally, shotguns played a role in maintaining order among the civilian populations involved in the massive movement and evacuation efforts, serving units of military police. However, these applications, though important, represented only a small fraction of the overall combat effort during the campaign. Despite the extensive documentation and numerous recorded accounts of combat in the Second World War, specific narratives describing the employment of shotguns in battle are surprisingly sparse. The Library of Congress Veterans History Project, which has collected thousands of interviews with veterans of the Pacific War, contains only a limited number of references to shotgun use in combat situations. Similarly, the National Museum of the Pacific War holds more than 4,000 oral histories, yet detailed descriptions of shotgun tactics or incidents are nearly absent. Even prominent memoirs by highly regarded authors such as Eugene Sledge, whose book, With the Old Breed, is widely considered one of the finest personal narratives of the Pacific War, make no mention of shotguns. Sledge, who served in a rifle company at Peleliu in Okinawa, focused on the brutal realities of infantry combat, but did not highlight shotguns as part of the weaponry or tactics he experienced firsthand. Likewise, Robert Leckey's memoir, Helmet for My Pillow, which recounts his service with the 1st Marine Division at Guadalcanal, also omits any discussion of shotguns. These notable absences in comprehensive personal accounts suggest that shotguns occupied a relatively peripheral role in Marine combat during the Pacific campaigns. Their limited appearance in official reports, veteran interviews, and personal memoirs indicates that, while present on the battlefield, shotguns did not serve as a primary weapon in the complex and evolving tactics that characterized the Marine Corps' island-hopping strategy. Instead, their use was sporadic, often confined to specific tasks like clearing buildings or maintaining order, rather than being a central element of offensive or defensive operations. Overall, the evidence paints a picture of shotguns as supplementary tools, important in certain situations, but not pivotal to the overall outcome of the battles in the Pacific Theater. Throughout the course of the war, the role of the shotgun was relatively modest, and available historical references tend to describe it as a highly specialized tool suited for particular circumstances rather than as a primary weapon in combat. The few records and testimonies that exist often recall the shotgun's use by veterans, mainly in specific scenarios, such as nighttime security measures and jungle ambushes, where its close-range power was advantageous. However, they consistently highlight that the ultimate outcome of battles, especially in the Pacific Theater, was predominantly determined by more conventional firearms like rifles, machine guns, and mortars. This perspective is supported by official military records, which reveal that shotguns made up less than 2% of the total armament issued to divisions. During the Second World War, American industry did produce a significant number of military-grade shotguns in response to wartime demands. Winchester, one of the leading firearms manufacturers, supplied roughly 25,000 units of the Model 97 and between 60,000 and 80,000 units of the Model 12, all produced under military contracts. Other well-known manufacturers such as Remington, Stevens, and Ithaca also contributed thousands of shotguns to the war effort. While these figures underscore the impressive industrial capacity of the United States to arm its forces, they do not necessarily reflect widespread combat employment of the weapon. In fact, many of these shotguns found their way into roles far removed from the front lines. A considerable portion served within training facilities, guard units, and rear area security detachments, where their utility was more aligned with security and personnel management rather than direct combat. Military police units, for instance, relied on shotguns for controlling prisoners and securing convoys, while naval vessels carried them for boarding parties and security duties during patrols and in port. Additionally, air bases frequently used shotguns in perimeter defense, primarily to protect critical infrastructure from sabotage or infiltration. These secondary roles, though vital, absorbed much of the production capacity, but did little to establish the shotgun as a standard battlefield weapon. The stark discrepancy between the large number of shotguns manufactured and the scant references to their use in combat reports strongly suggests that, despite the U.S. military's capacity to equip entire Marine squads with shotguns, practical limitations prevented their widespread battlefield deployment. Challenges such as ammunition shortages, tactical doctrines favoring other weapons, and the perception of shotguns as specialized rather than general-purpose weapons all contributed to most shotguns remaining in auxiliary roles. From an operational perspective, the shotgun was seen more as a specialized tool rather than an integral part of standard infantry tactics. To understand its actual application in the Pacific campaigns, it is instructive to compare its use with other weapons that clearly played pivotal roles during combat. For example, the M2 flamethrower, which was introduced in 1943, appears in virtually every detailed account of cave and bunker clearing operations. Marines operating in Iwo Jima, for instance, recorded the expenditure of some 27,000 gallons of flamethrower fuel and provided thorough evaluations of its tactical effectiveness. In sharp contrast, detailed records of shotgun ammunition consumption and deployment are notably absent from such reports. The Browning automatic rifle, commonly known as the BAR, served as the backbone of the Marine Squad's firepower by 1944. Its employment is well documented, with detailed training programs and tactical doctrines explaining its use on the battlefield. Every Marine rifle squad included 3 bar teams, and their tactics, accuracy, and tactical impact are extensively recorded in official histories. Conversely, shotguns, despite being officially authorized and produced in large numbers, never attained similar doctrinal integration or combat documentation. Veterans occasionally recall instances of shotgun use, but these accounts are sparse and lack the detail found in records of the BAR or machine guns like the M1918 Browning. These latter weapons have extensive documentation of their employment, ammunition expenditure, and tactical impact, illustrating their prominent role in combat scenarios. The relative scarcity of combat accounts involving shotguns implies that their practical use during engagements was limited, despite the official authorizations and manufacturing figures. This disconnect between the mythic image of the shotgun, fostered by wartime propaganda, movies, and sensationalized stories, and the historical reality underscores broader patterns in how World War II history has been shaped. Popular culture, influenced heavily by Hollywood films and sensational accounts, often elevates certain weapons, including the shotgun, giving them a prominent place in the collective imagination that outstrips their actual battlefield significance. In conclusion, while the shotgun's dramatic appearance and its portrayal in war stories might suggest it was a formidable force in combat, the historical evidence points to a different reality. Its primary role was that of a specialized instrument serving specific needs rather than a universally employed battlefield weapon. The numbers and records clearly show that despite the considerable industrial effort placed behind producing shotguns, their actual use in combat was limited and confined mostly to auxiliary roles. The romanticized image of the shotgun as a decisive weapon in the Pacific campaigns persists largely because of cultural representations rather than documented military practice. The striking visual appeal and the visceral, close-quarters impact of shotguns naturally fostered a kind of mythology around their use during the Pacific theater of World War II. In the immediate aftermath of the war, many films depicted American Marines storming enemy positions with shotguns in hand, vividly illustrating scenes of intense, up-close combat. These cinematic portrayals left a lasting impression on the public consciousness, creating images of shotguns as quintessential weapons of the Pacific War. Images that, despite their popularity, were not fully supported by original, primary sources from the battlefield. Over time, this romanticized view was reinforced through various forms of popular media, including video games and historical narratives, which continued to portray shotguns as iconic tools of the Pacific conflict. Such depictions helped cement their status as emblematic weapons of the war, even though concrete documentation of their actual employment in combat remains limited and ambiguous. This process of myth-making, while captivating, tends to obscure the more straightforward reality that shotguns primarily played a secondary support-oriented role during the campaign. Their portrayal as central combat tools often serves narrative convenience, providing dramatic scenes of close-quarters combat and emphasizing contrast between American technological ingenuity and Japanese defenses. Yet when the historical facts are examined carefully, it becomes clear that, although shotguns were indeed present in some capacities and could be effective in certain situations, they never attained the tactical dominance or significance of more conventional weapons such as rifles, machine guns, mortars, or flamethrowers in shaping the outcomes of battles. The few veteran accounts that do exist offer valuable insights into how shotguns were actually employed by soldiers during the war. Marines who carried these weapons often described them as useful for specific tasks, but cumbersome for general combat scenarios. The weight of the shotgun, combined with its limited ammunition capacity and specialized role, meant that many soldiers preferred their rifles during most routine operations. This practical perspective underscores the notion that shotguns, while useful in particular niches, were not versatile enough to replace primary weapons in the chaos of combat. One Marine veteran, interviewed in 1985, recounted carrying a Model 97 shotgun during the Guadalcanal campaign. He noted that it was particularly effective for night watch duties and navigating through jungle paths, where its reliability in close, concealed environments was advantageous. However, he also emphasized that when actual shooting started and distance became a factor, a rifle was the weapon of choice. This pragmatic assessment highlights the inherent limitations of shotguns in diverse combat situations. They excelled in their designated roles but were not suited for ranged engagements or sustained combat. Further illustrating this point, another veteran from the 2nd Marine Division explained the logistical and tactical realities of shotgun distribution within his unit. Each squad was theoretically authorized to carry one shotgun, yet in practice, these weapons often remained with company-level supplies rather than individual squads. Many soldiers viewed shotguns as too specialized for everyday use, preferring their rifles for routine tasks. This discrepancy between official policy and battlefield practicality reveals how, despite formal allocations, shotguns rarely became frontline mainstays, reflecting their limited adaptability in the broader scope of combat operations. During the war, a significant development occurred in the form of improved ammunition to address some of the shotgun's known vulnerabilities, particularly susceptibility to moisture, which had been a persistent problem throughout the Pacific campaign. In March of 1945, the military adopted brass-cased M19 ammunition, designed to withstand the humid environment and prevent corrosion. This technological advancement was intended to enhance the reliability of shotgun weapons, especially during occupation duties and in preparation for the anticipated invasion of Japan. However, By the time this new ammunition was introduced, it was too late to influence the outcome of ongoing battles. In March of 1945, the island of Iwo Jima had already been secured, and the invasion of Okinawa was imminent, with only weeks remaining before the pivotal landings. The Philippines campaign had largely wrapped up, and subsequent battles in the Pacific were fought using more established tactics and weaponry. Although the brass ammunition did prove to be beneficial for occupation duties and could have potentially improved the effectiveness of shotguns in urban combat scenarios, such as the planned invasion of Japanese cities, its impact remained largely untested in actual combat. The atomic bomb's deployment in August of 1945 ultimately rendered the need for a large-scale invasion of Japan unnecessary, thus eliminating the environment in which the brass-cased ammunition might have been most advantageous. This development meant that the anticipated roles for shotguns, especially in urban warfare, were never fully realized or tested under combat conditions. Post-war analyses, however, suggest that if this brass ammunition had been available earlier, it could have significantly increased the shotgun's utility in close-quarters combat situations, making it a more formidable weapon in the arsenal. Yet such retrospective speculation cannot alter or rewrite the actual course of history or the documented realities of wartime deployment. Throughout most of the Pacific War, shotguns, despite their dramatic potential and visual impact, faced numerous limitations that prevented them from becoming key weapons in the U.S. military's arsenal. During the tumultuous years of the Second World War, the deployment of shotguns on the battlefield presented numerous challenges that considerably hindered their overall effectiveness and practical use during combat operations. These issues related primarily to the reliability of ammunition, which proved to be a significant obstacle, ultimately limiting the tactical value of shotguns in the heat of battle. This unreliability meant that soldiers could not fully depend on these weapons in critical moments, reducing their overall impact on combat outcomes. Interestingly, the absence of any specific Japanese tactics or countermeasures aimed explicitly at neutralizing or mitigating the threat posed by shotguns offers a notable point of historical significance. While Japanese forces dedicated considerable effort to devising detailed responses to many American weapon systems, responses that often had a profound influence on the conduct of combat, no comparable measures were developed against shotguns. This disparity highlights a broader pattern in Japanese tactical evolution during the Pacific War. Their strategic focus was predominantly directed towards countering American technological and material superiority through terrain advantage, fortified defenses, and innovative defensive techniques. Throughout the conflict, the Japanese military shifted its approach from static beach defenses to more dynamic inland fortification, designed to exploit terrain features. They constructed complex, interconnected tunnel networks that facilitated movement and supply, making it harder for American forces to break through. Over time, they also abandoned the costly and often ineffective tactic of banzai charges, large-scale aggressive assaults, opting instead for defensive measures that aim to absorb and wear down enemy advances. These adaptations were largely responses to the overwhelming firepower and material superiority of American forces, rather than specific threats posed by weapons like shotguns. Following the war, extensive Japanese military analyses focused on understanding and dissecting American tactics and weapon systems. These post-war studies provided detailed insights into the coordination of artillery support, naval gunfire, and tank infantry cooperation, which were crucial to American operational success. However, remarkably, these comprehensive examinations scarcely mentioned shotguns at all, implying that shotguns had played a minimal role, or at least a negligible impact, on Japanese tactical thinking and strategy. One of the most revealing aspects regarding the role of shotguns during the conflict is the conspicuous absence of any statistical data or quantitative analysis related to their use. World War II generated vast amounts of operational data, including ammunition expenditure, casualty reports, and weapon effectiveness studies across various arms, from artillery to small arms. Yet despite this repository of information, no reliable statistics exist that directly correlate shotgun usage with enemy casualties or tactical successes. The operational research units, tasked with analyzing weapon performance and combat efficacy during the war, produced detailed reports on artillery accuracy, mortar effectiveness, and small arms performance. These documents often included hit probabilities, casualty rates, and ammunition efficiency metrics, data crucial for tactical planning and logistical support. In stark contrast, no similar studies or statistical evaluations for shotguns are available from the wartime archives. This absence strongly suggests that shotguns were seldom employed in combat scenarios to a degree that warranted detailed analysis, or that their battlefield usage was too sporadic and limited to generate meaningful data. Even informal estimates from veterans and soldiers who experience combat are absent for shotgun employment. Soldiers generally tend to recall and document the number of rifle rounds fired, grenades thrown, or mortar shells expended, as these figures are more systematically recorded or easier to estimate. In contrast, no such estimates or recollections concerning shotgun rounds, whether buckshot or slugs, appear in personal memoirs or veteran interviews. This statistical void is indicative of shotguns remaining peripheral and marginal within the main scope of combat operations, despite their presence in some Marine units and the training provided to prepare soldiers for their use. At Marine training camps, extensive instruction was devoted to the effective handling and firing of shotguns. Marines underwent rigorous training in techniques such as slamfire, practiced shooting scenarios in jungle conditions, and qualified with various types of ammunition, including buckshot and slugs. Such training instilled the expectation that shotguns would serve as vital weapons in combat, especially in close-quarters fighting and jungle warfare, where their stopping power and ease of handling could be advantageous. Nevertheless, the realities of combat often diverge sharply from the controlled environment of training. Conditions at training facilities like Camp Pendleton did not replicate the humid, muddy, and unpredictable environments encountered on Guadalcanal, Eniwetok, or other Pacific islands. The training targets, which were static and predictable, did not simulate the aggressive, often hostile responses of real enemies, nor did they require engagements at extended ranges, where shotguns might have proven less effective. The close-range, high-intensity encounters that dominated training exercises proved to be less frequent than anticipated in actual combat conditions. The unpredictable terrain, the presence of enemy fire, and the need for sustained, accurate fire at longer distances often rendered the shotgun less practical than in training scenarios. This disconnect between the optimistic expectations set during Marine training and the harsh realities of combat operations underscores how the theoretical role of shotguns was diminished in practice, making their battlefield utility limited and situational at best. The use and strategic employment of shotguns during World War II reveal a nuanced story that closely parallels the experiences with other specialized military equipment of the era. Despite the initial enthusiasm and strategic planning, the practical deployment of shotguns in combat conditions was heavily constrained by logistical realities, limited utility, and evolving battlefield dynamics. The extensive time allocated for training Marines in bayonet techniques, for instance, underscores the importance placed on close-quarters combat skills, even though actual bayonet fights remain rare and often inconsequential on the battlefield. Similarly, preparations for chemical warfare showcased the military's foresight, yet these measures ultimately proved unnecessary, as gas attacks never came to pass in the campaigns where such preparations were most relevant. The same pattern applied to shotgun training. Marines were drilled in its use as a potential close combat solution, but actual combat scenarios seldom unfolded in ways that justified or required such proficiency. The logistical challenges associated with supplying shotguns further compounded their limited use. Each 12-gauge shell, due to its larger size and weight, was roughly twice as heavy as a standard rifle cartridge and occupied nearly 3 times the space in a soldier's pack. This meant that a Marine could carry roughly 80 rounds of rifle ammunition within the same weight and space allocated for just 36 shotgun shells. Consequently, supply ships prioritized more versatile and widely used ammunition types, such as rifle rounds, machine gun belts, and mortar shells, over the more specialized shotgun loads. The limited cargo capacity of landing craft made every piece of ammunition a valuable commodity, requiring strict justification for each case. Shotgun shells, especially those designed for specialized roles, were deemed lower in priority compared to general-purpose munitions, which could serve a broader range of combat scenarios. These logistical realities meant that, even when shotguns were present in the theater, their ammunition stocks remained sparse. Veterans often recall receiving only 1 or 2 boxes of shells per operation, which had to be rationed carefully to last through entire campaigns. This scarcity discouraged widespread or aggressive use of shotguns, effectively reducing their impact on combat outcomes well below their theoretical potential. Military planners had initially envisioned shotguns as particularly effective in urban combat environments, prompting requests for increased allocations, especially during the battles for Manila and Naha. At first glance, the confined spaces, short engagement distances, and room-clearing requirements of urban warfare seemed tailor-made for shotgun employment. Yet the harsh reality of combat in these environments revealed unforeseen limitations. Japanese defenders in both Manila and Naha created well-fortified kill zones with barricades, interconnected fields of fire, and booby traps that kept advancing Marines at ranges beyond the effective reach of shotguns. These defenses rendered the devastating close-range power of shotguns largely irrelevant. Marines simply could not close the distance necessary to maximize their potential. In the few instances where urban close-quarters combat did occur, veterans recall using alternative weapons such as grenades, Thompson submachine guns, and flamethrowers, which offered comparable or superior effectiveness at close range. The Thompson, with its 30-round magazine capacity, far surpassed the shotgun's 6-round limit and proved crucial during sustained firefights. While the impact of shotguns on Japanese military tactics and thinking was minimal, their cultural significance within American military mythology grew disproportionately. The iconic image of a Marine wielding a trench gun to clear Japanese positions became emblematic of American wartime heroism, despite the limited empirical evidence supporting the weapon's battlefield dominance. This cultural mythologization extended beyond mere symbolism. It embodied American pragmatism, repurposing hunting and sporting shotguns for military use, destined to stand apart from European military traditions that often viewed such weapons as peripheral. This narrative resonated strongly within the American self-image as innovative, practical, and unconstrained by traditional military conventions. It also served as potent propaganda, reinforcing the perception of Americans as resourceful and adaptable, even if the actual combat performance of shotguns was more modest. In the end, the reality of battlefield conditions, logistical constraints, and tactical developments demonstrated that shotguns, while iconic and culturally significant, played a relatively minor role on the front lines compared to other weapons more suited to the demands of modern warfare. Japanese military culture during the early to mid-20th century was deeply rooted in a well-established tradition that prioritized the use of rifles, machine guns, and artillery as the primary and most appropriate weapons for warfare. This cultural framework was so ingrained that shotguns, despite their effectiveness in certain tactical scenarios, were never officially recognized or integrated into Japan's military strategies or doctrinal concepts. Consequently, this omission is often viewed as a significant oversight, a kind of cultural blind spot that allegedly left Japanese forces ill-prepared for situations where close-quarters combat might have benefited from such weapons. Yet a closer examination of historical evidence reveals that the reality was more nuanced. It suggests that Japan's limited use of shotguns in combat was less about cultural neglect and more about the practical realities of how these weapons were employed, or rather, how they failed to be employed on the battlefield. The story of shotguns in military contexts underscores the intricate and often complex relationship between technological innovation and military doctrine. While shotguns were designed to succeed in close-range encounters, exploiting wide shot patterns and rapid firing capabilities that proved devastating in confined jungle environments, their effectiveness was heavily dependent on specific tactical conditions. These conditions, however, seldom materialized in actual combat scenarios. During the Pacific War, the evolving doctrine of Marine units, for instance, continually adapted to the demands of jungle warfare, yet shotguns never achieved a permanent or prominent place within their core tactical systems. Instead, they remained supplementary tools, used selectively in particular situations, rather than being recognized as standard or essential components of squad firepower. This marginalization of shotguns from formal doctrine was rooted not in technological shortcomings, but in the practical realities observed during combat. The effectiveness of weapons in battle depends heavily on how well their use is integrated into established tactical frameworks. The development of Marine squad tactics, particularly with the adoption of the M1 rifle and later machine guns, became increasingly sophisticated and detailed, with comprehensive doctrines that outlined their employment in various combat scenarios. The shotgun, however, was never incorporated into these detailed tactical schemas to a significant degree. Instead, it remained a weapon of convenience, useful in niche situations such as clearing dense jungle underbrush or dealing with close-range threats, but never a central element of squad-level firepower. The evolution of weapon use during the war provides a stark contrast. For example, the flamethrower emerged as a revolutionary tool for bunker clearing, prompting extensive doctrinal development and tactical innovation. Its success was so profound that it became a standard part of assault tactics against fortified positions. Shotguns, despite their theoretical potential, did not inspire comparable doctrinal shifts. The absence of a systematic approach to shotgun employment indicates that their tactical utility was viewed as limited within the broader framework of military operations. Further insight into the actual utilization of shotguns during the war can be gleaned from official military administrative records, requisition documents, repair logs, replacement requests, and supply reports. These records paint a revealing picture. They show that rifles and machine guns were consistently in demand, with parts and ammunition appearing frequently in supply and maintenance reports, reflecting heavy usage and ongoing combat employment. Conversely, requests for shotgun parts were notably rare, suggesting that they saw little combat use and that most shotguns remained largely in storage or reserve, requiring minimal maintenance related to firing wear. Armorer reports from Marine divisions reinforce this conclusion. Weapons subjected to daily combat conditions, rifles and machine guns, demanded constant repairs and cleaning, often due to extensive firing and harsh environmental conditions. Shotguns, on the other hand, showed few signs of wear from firing since they were seldom used in active combat situations. Instead, they primarily required cleaning for storage-related corrosion, indicating that many shotguns spent more time dormant in armories or storage facilities than in the thick of the fight. This pattern is further supported by ammunition requisition records. Divisions requested millions of rounds of rifle ammunition and hundreds of thousands of rounds of machine gun ammunition to sustain their operations. In stark contrast, requests for shotgun shells remain modest and primarily associated with training exercises rather than frontline combat needs. Such administrative data corroborate veteran accounts that consistently depict shotguns as weapons of limited battlefield employment during the Pacific Campaign. Looking beyond U.S. forces, the experiences of other nations involved in the Pacific and broader conflicts provide additional context. The British and Australian military forces, for example, possessed only a minimal number of shotguns, favoring rifles and submachine guns for jungle combat. Their combat effectiveness in jungle warfare, achieved without significant reliance on shotguns, suggests that these weapons were not deemed critical for success in such environments. Similarly, Soviet forces operating across diverse terrains, from the urban ruins of Stalingrad to rural regions beyond, never adopted combat shotguns despite their massive small arms production and broad arsenal. Even Chinese troops who faced intense close-quarters combat throughout their protracted war with Japan did not incorporate shotguns into their standard armament. This consistent pattern across multiple nations highlights that, despite the potential advantages of shotguns in close-range combat, their strategic and tactical utility was never recognized as. Despite the evident and pressing need for efficient and reliable weaponry, the role of shotguns in military combat during the mid-20th century was far from decisive. Analyzing this from an international perspective reveals that rather than being an indispensable element of a combatant's arsenal, shotguns were perceived more as one among many tactical options, an auxiliary tool rather than a cornerstone of battlefield strategy. Different nations, each with their unique doctrines and logistical capabilities, often achieved comparable combat outcomes by employing a variety of weapon combinations. This variety underscores that the tactical influence of shotguns, despite the significant American production capacity dedicated to their manufacture, remained marginal in the broader scope of warfare. Following the conclusion of World War II, military analysts undertook comprehensive evaluations of the weapons used during the conflict, aiming to determine which among them merited continued development and deployment for future engagements. These assessments placed a premium on rifles, machine guns, mortars, and recoilless rifles, all of which were prioritized for further refinement. In stark contrast, shotguns received minimal attention, their performance during the war not compelling enough to justify large-scale investment or widespread adoption. This was particularly evident during the subsequent Korean War, where shotguns were employed sparingly despite encountering extensive close-quarters combat conditions. Marine units operating in Korea favored carrying M1 Garand rifles, Browning automatic rifles, and carbines instead of shotguns for their patrol and combat operations, reflecting a practical and veteran-informed judgment. This pragmatic decision by combat veterans who had first-hand experience in the Pacific theater highlights their assessment of shotguns' real versus perceived utility on the battlefield. The limited use of shotguns during the Korean conflict indicates that, at least in their eyes, these weapons did not substantially enhance combat effectiveness. Later, during the Vietnam War, shotgun usage experienced a modest revival, notably with the introduction of modified commercial models tailored for jungle patrols and close-quarters engagements. Yet even in the dense and often brutal jungle environments, shotguns remain specialized tools, primarily reserved for point men, tunnel rats, and other specialized personnel rather than becoming standard issue across infantry units. This pattern of selective deployment has persisted into modern military practice, where shotguns continue to serve particular roles, such as breaching, close-quarters combat, or specialized patrols, rather than functioning as a universal weapon across combat scenarios. The historical record, especially regarding encounters between Japanese forces and American shotguns during World War II, provides valuable insights. First, although shotguns were present within Marine units throughout the Pacific Campaign, their actual employment in combat was limited. Factors such as ammunition shortages, tactical constraints, and doctrinal preferences kept shotguns largely in secondary roles. The introduction of brass ammunition in March of 1945 was too late to significantly influence combat operations or change existing tactical paradigms. Second, Japanese forces did not develop targeted countermeasures specifically aimed at neutralizing shotguns. This was primarily because shotguns, in the context of the war, never achieved a level of tactical impact sufficient to warrant specialized tactics or equipment. Their marginal role is further evidenced by the lack of references to shotguns in Japanese military documents, training manuals, and post-war analyses. Instead, Japanese tactical evolution responded broadly to American firepower as a whole, rather than focusing on or reacting to particular weapons like shotguns. Third, there exists a notable discrepancy between the number of shotguns authorized for use by Marine divisions and the actual documented employment during combat. While each division was authorized to hold around 306 shotguns, most of these weapons remained in secondary capacities, used for guard duties, training exercises, or rear area security, rather than being deployed on the front lines. Veteran accounts that mention shotguns tend to describe them as useful tools for specific situations or tasks, but not as primary weapons capable of significantly shaping the outcome of combat engagements. Finally, the romanticized myth surrounding the role of shotguns in the Pacific War exceeds the scope of their actual historical impact. Popular culture has elevated shotguns to iconic status, imbuing them with almost legendary significance despite the limited primary source evidence supporting their battlefield effectiveness. This widespread myth-making tends to overshadow the more mundane and practical reality of their true battlefield utility, which was largely confined to niche roles rather than broad, decisive use. In summary, the historical evidence points to a clear conclusion. While shotguns were present and sometimes used in combat zones, their overall tactical impact during World War II and subsequent conflicts was minimal. They functioned mostly as supplementary tools, their true value recognized only in specific limited contexts. Their perceived significance has been amplified over time through cultural myth-making, but this does not align with the documented operational realities, which consistently demonstrated that shotguns occupied a marginal, albeit sometimes symbolically iconic position within the broader spectrum of military weaponry. In the complex landscape of warfare, it has long been recognized that the ultimate success or failure of military engagements hinges on a multitude of factors beyond mere weaponry. While firearms such as rifles, machine guns, mortars, and flamethrowers have historically played decisive roles in shaping the outcomes of battles, it is important to understand that the introduction of a weapon alone does not automatically translate into battlefield dominance. The story of the shotgun, a firearm often considered specialized and somewhat peripheral, offers valuable insights into the broader themes of military innovation, strategic adaptation, and the often intricate relationship between technical capability and practical effectiveness. Indeed, shotguns, despite their intriguing theoretical advantages, never managed to redefine tactical paradigms or secure a pivotal role in combat scenarios. Their limited success highlights a fundamental reality: that weapons need to be seamlessly integrated into an overarching military doctrine, supported by appropriate logistical arrangements and complemented by comprehensive training to realize their full potential on the battlefield. Without such integration, even the most advanced or specialized weaponry risks remaining a niche tool with minimal impact. Throughout the Pacific theater of World War II, the Japanese military's efforts to evaluate and respond to new weapons technologies reflected a pragmatic understanding of their actual battlefield significance. While the Japanese command recognized the theoretical appeal of shotguns, particularly their effectiveness in close-quarters combat, their failure to fully anticipate or incorporate shotguns into their tactical framework proved largely inconsequential in terms of influencing the war's overall course. This was because shotguns, regardless of their potential, never achieved the level of tactical impact necessary to exploit any oversight or to alter strategic calculations. In fact, the Japanese military's pre-war and wartime assessments demonstrated a clear understanding that shotguns played a marginal role in the grand scheme of combat operations. Their limited deployment and the scarcity of detailed combat records underscore that shotguns were regarded as specialized tools, useful in certain niche situations, but not as decisive weapons capable of turning the tide of battles. The primary weapons and systems that truly shaped the Pacific conflict, artillery, naval gunfire support, aircraft, and flamethrowers, received the bulk of Japanese attention and resources, reflecting a focus on the technology that had proven its battlefield worth. From an industrial perspective, the United States demonstrated impressive manufacturing capacity during the war, producing vast quantities of military shotguns. This capacity highlighted American industrial prowess and logistical organization. However, the ability to produce large numbers of shotguns did not automatically translate into battlefield effectiveness. The disconnect between production and practical employment became evident in the Pacific theater, where conditions and tactical requirements often differed markedly from those in which shotguns might have been most useful. This disparity underscores a broader lesson about the nature of military power. Possessing the industrial capacity to produce weapons is only part of the equation. The real challenge lies in effectively employing those weapons within a complex operational environment. The U.S. military's extensive production of shotguns was impressive, but their actual use in combat proved limited, reinforcing the idea that technological and industrial strength alone do not guarantee tactical or strategic advantage. The encounter between Japanese infantry and American shotguns during World War II further illustrates this point. Contrary to some popular narratives that suggest shotguns were a game-changer, the reality was more nuanced. While shotguns occasionally proved useful in certain close-quarter situations, they did not deliver the devastating, battlefield-altering effects often attributed to them in hindsight. This discrepancy between myth and reality reveals that the tactical impact of shotguns was overstated in post-war accounts, which sometimes romanticize their potential as close combat weapons. Japanese forces, upon facing American shotguns, were indeed unprepared for their presence in specific combat scenarios. Yet this lack of preparedness was largely of marginal significance, because shotguns were employed sparingly and in limited roles. Their influence on the larger strategic picture was minimal, and the overall Japanese tactical approach, focused on countering the weapons and tactics that actually dictated the course of battles, remained effective. The Japanese military correctly prioritized their efforts on countering artillery, naval gunfire, aircraft, and flamethrowers, systems which had repeatedly demonstrated their battlefield dominance, rather than overestimating the threat posed by shotguns. The historical record, including production figures, training manuals, and organizational charts, confirms that shotguns were indeed present within Marine units and were occasionally issued for specific tasks. Veterans who carried shotguns often recall them as specialized tools, useful in certain confined or jungle combat environments, rather than as primary weapons that could decisively influence the outcome of engagements. While the presence of shotguns in some units is well documented, detailed combat accounts and statistical analyses reveal that their actual employment was limited, and they rarely played a central role in decisive battles. By March of the year 1945, the U.S. military introduced brass ammunition designed to withstand the humid and moist conditions prevalent in the Pacific Islands. This technical development addressed a critical logistical issue, moisture causing ammunition failures, but arrived too late to significantly influence major campaigns. By that point, the tide of the Pacific War had turned decisively in favor of, throughout the course of modern military operations, shotguns have maintained a niche but noteworthy role, primarily serving specialized functions rather than acting as frontline weapons. These roles include breaching enemy doors during assaults, employing less lethal ammunition for crowd control, or non-lethal engagements, and navigating tight, close-quarters combat where precision and maneuverability are paramount. Despite their limited scope, these tactical applications highlight the enduring utility of shotguns in specific military contexts, even as their broader battlefield relevance wanes. Interestingly, this contemporary use of shotguns aligns more closely with their actual employment during the Second World War than the exaggerated stories propagated by popular mythmakers. While modern narratives often paint shotguns as essential or iconic combat tools for infantry, in reality their role was much more constrained. They served crucial but narrowly defined purposes and rarely, if ever, formed the backbone of combat strategies. The discrepancy between myth and reality underscores how war stories tend to morph over time, transforming factual accounts into elaborate narratives that often exaggerate the importance of certain weapons or tactics. The vivid imagery of American Marines storming Japanese positions armed with shotguns, an image that has become entrenched in collective memory, serves more to satisfy storytelling needs than to reflect actual battlefield practices. Such stories fulfill cultural and patriotic functions by emphasizing American ingenuity, resourcefulness, and adaptability. They highlight the image of soldiers using whatever tools were at hand to overcome adversity, even if the historical record reveals a more mundane picture. To truly understand the role of shotguns in the Pacific theater, one must carefully disentangle these enduring myths from the verified facts derived from official records, veteran testimonies, and contemporary reports. In truth, shotguns during the Pacific War were present, authorized, and occasionally effective, but they never gained the tactical prominence that popular stories suggest. Japanese infantry personnel, for instance, might have been caught off guard by the presence of American 12-gauge shotguns during assaults, an unexpected sight that could evoke surprise. However, this surprise proved largely inconsequential in the larger scheme of battle outcomes, which were predominantly decided by the overwhelming firepower, logistical support, and integrated tactics employed by American forces. The rare appearance of shotguns did little to alter the course of battles where superior industrial capacity, coordinated combined arms operations, and naval dominance played decisive roles. The sober historical record paints a less sensational but more accurate picture. Shotguns were employed as specialized tools suited for particular scenarios. Their ammunition was often a limiting factor, especially early in the conflict, and their use remained confined mainly to secondary or support roles. Despite occasional effectiveness at close range, shotguns never achieved the tactical impact necessary to shift the balance of combat on a broad scale. Their influence on the overall outcome of the Pacific War was minimal, and any claims of their decisive nature are more rooted in myth than fact. While such truths may lack the dramatic flair of legendary narratives, they are grounded firmly in evidence gathered from primary sources, war diaries, veteran interviews, and official military documents. Analyzing these sources reveals that the stories of Japanese soldiers encountering American shotguns serve as much as a reflection of military myth-making as they do of actual combat scenarios. The popular perception of shotguns as critical battlefield weapons ultimately reveals the tendency of war stories to elevate minor details into symbols of heroism and innovation. Despite their limited tactical impact, shotguns did acquire a certain cultural significance. They became symbols of American pragmatism and resourcefulness, embodying the idea that soldiers could adapt and make use of whatever equipment was available. This symbolic value often overshadowed their relatively modest battlefield record and served to reinforce narratives of American ingenuity and determination. The divergence between myth and reality underscores a broader truth about military history: that popular accounts often prioritize compelling stories over the often dull but essential truths of warfare. For the Japanese infantry, encountering American shotguns during combat was indeed surprising, and perhaps even startling. Yet their fear or misconception that these weapons could dramatically influence the fighting was misplaced. In reality, the weapons that most decisively defeated Japanese forces in the Pacific were not shotguns, but the formidable combination of industrial strength, logistical superiority, coordinated tactical operations, and relentless naval power. These factors proved far more effective in overcoming Japanese defenses and securing victory than the sporadic use of buckshot in jungle combat. In understanding this story correctly, it becomes clear that the narrative of the shotgun in the Pacific War is not about American tactical innovation or surprising weaponry. Instead, it exemplifies how complex and layered the relationship is between military reality and myth-making. The tales of shotguns serve as a vivid illustration of how history can be shaped, exaggerated, or romanticized, often to serve cultural or ideological purposes rather than to faithfully recount facts. They remind us that the true story of warfare is often less glamorous, but ultimately more instructive when viewed through the lens of thorough historical analysis. Understanding the complex tapestry of the Pacific War requires a thorough examination of several interconnected themes: military capability, the strategic deployment of forces in combat, and the profound influence of historical mythology that often shapes perceptions of the conflict. At the heart of any discussion on the Pacific War lies the assessment of the military capabilities possessed by the involved nations. This encompasses not only the raw strength of their armed forces, but also the technological sophistication, logistical infrastructure, and strategic ingenuity that determine their effectiveness in battle. For instance, the United States invested heavily in developing a formidable navy, advanced aircraft carriers, and innovative amphibious assault techniques, which played a decisive role in the conflict's outcome. Conversely, Japan's military strength was characterized by a highly trained, disciplined Navy and Air Force, optimized for swift offensives and expansive island campaigns. The disparity in industrial capacity, resource availability, and technological innovation between the belligerents significantly influenced the scale and duration of fighting across the vast Pacific theater. Moving beyond capabilities, the employment of combat strategies and tactics reveals much about how each side sought to leverage their strengths and exploit their adversaries' weaknesses. Amphibious warfare, exemplified by pivotal battles such as Guadalcanal and Leyte Gulf, showcase the importance of coordination between naval and land forces in achieving strategic objectives across dispersed islands and atolls. The extensive use of carrier-based air power revolutionized maritime combat, emphasizing mobility and air superiority. Meanwhile, the Japanese relied on aggressive, sometimes kamikaze-style tactics, aiming to inflict maximum damage and demoralize their opponents. Their emphasis on surprise attacks and defensive perimeter tactics reflected their strategic priorities and resource limitations. These combat employment strategies were not static. They evolved in response to battlefield realities, technological innovations, and shifts in strategic goals, illustrating the dynamic nature of warfare in this sprawling theater. Adding another layer to the understanding of the Pacific War is the role of historical mythology, stories, legends, and collective narratives that have grown around the conflict over the decades. These myths often serve to reinforce national identities, valorize certain actions, and shape public perceptions of heroism or villainy. For example, the valorization of the Battle of Midway as a turning point in the Pacific Campaign has become a potent symbol of American resilience and ingenuity, fueling national pride and military tradition. Conversely, narratives surrounding Japanese soldiers and their wartime conduct have been influenced by cultural stories about honor, sacrifice, and the tragic consequences of war. These collective stories can sometimes obscure the nuanced realities of the conflict, but they also serve as a means of understanding how societies process and interpret wartime experiences. Over time, these myths have been reinforced through education, media, and commemorative practices, embedding them deeply into the cultural consciousness. In sum, a comprehensive understanding of the Pacific War requires exploring the interplay between tangible military strength, the tactical and strategic choices made during combat, and the powerful stories that have grown around the conflict. This multifaceted approach not only reveals the complexities of the war itself, but also highlights how history and myth intertwine, shaping national identities and collective memories long after the guns have fallen silent.